Hi everyone. If you're watching this video, it will be a quick review for the test that's in my class. So here's how the test will roughly work. The test will be laid out in three parts. The first part will be terminology. So I've got a file here with the actual terms. You've got various terms, most of which we talked about. I think I've only briefly mentioned bit and byte, but those are the smallest ways you can basically, I guess you can say bits, the smallest way you can represent data on a computer, a 0 or 1. A byte is 8 of those, which basically equates to like a letter. So a character would be 1 byte in size. Boolean, of course, is true, false. Characters are letters. Comments in Python, it uses the hashtag. If you want to do more than a single line, then you can actually use the little apostrophes around it. Compiler, whether it's Java or Python, that is essentially what translates what you write, which is source code, into something a computer can understand. It's the translator program. Declaration, definition are the same thing for the most part. Whenever you set up a variable, you have to define it, you have to declare it, you have to say, hey, I am making a variable, here's the name. In Java, you have to go a little bit further and declare what type of data it's going to be as well. A float would be, your decimal numbers, goes up to several digits. IDE, or Integrated Development Environment, that would be for Java like NetBeans or Eclipse. For Python, idle, basically a program where you can write your code, see errors, run it, fix it, run it again, all in one place. That's what's called an integrated development environment. An integer is just a whole number, no decimal places, positive, negative, whereas a float is numbers, positive, negative, but decimal places. Logic error, this would be your error that occurs whenever you write some code and it doesn't necessarily crash, but it doesn't do what you think it will do. Maybe it gives you different values than what you expect. Now, logic error can also cause a crash, which is called a runtime error. It means in the program itself it's running, but it did something weird and caused it to crash. Source code, we mentioned that before, but that's the code you actually type. A string is a set of letters or characters. Syntax error means I wrote something incorrectly, like there's not a parentheses or a quote, or I misspelled something. Usually this is the easiest thing to fix, whereas the logic errors are a little bit more difficult. A variable is, well, a place to store information. I can put text or numbers into a variable, and I can add and subtract and do math to them. Cast is essentially forcing one variable to be something else. This would be for example, when you take user input even in Java this happens at times, but in Python you take user input, it's always a string. In Java, if you take user input from the JOption pane, it's always a string. And in both cases you have to force it to be an int, if it's an int. If I try to force it to be an int and it's not, that will usually cause crashes too. Well, anyway, those are your terms for this test. You also need to know the different types of data and what they are. Like, what is an integer? If I give you a number, is that an integer or is that a float? Is that a Boolean, which is true, false? Is this a character or a string? So know those different data types, what they look like. After you get through that initial text term part of the test, you'll have two others. The first part is pretty simple. Here's some code. What will it do if it runs? Now for this, you simply just have to be able to read it and tell me what's going to happen. Is it going to do math? Is it going to print something on the screen? What is going to be the end result? Now you don't have to go so far as to type every single line. This line will do this line will do that. I just want to know the end result. If you can tell me the end result, then you should know what most of it does. That tells me without having to read through a whole paragraph of describing something. So if it's going to do a whole bunch of math and then finally display, woohoo, let's party, then I just want you to tell me what it's going to display. And you'll have several programs to read through and write the basically results. Now for that, I don't want you to run any of that code. You should be able to read it. One of the, I guess you can say, things you need to be a programmer is simply being able to read code, know the jargon, terminology, and finally being able to write it. I'll give you a program or two, and you simply just have to make it, and then attach it to the test. There'll be a little spot for you to submit it. That's it. So you'll have your terms section, you'll have some code to read, and then the last part will just be a simple program. It'll be, something that shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes, really. But you can look at your old projects and, see how you did those and use that to construct it if you need, at least for that part. And once you get it submitted, you're good to go. All that would be left is for me to actually grade things. Now, the test itself typically will grade all the term stuff that you turn in, but the rest of it I'll have to look at. Some of it can be open to the interpretation. It's not a, it is 100% exactly this. Maybe somebody put a capital letter somewhere or an extra period when they describe what it's going to do. So I have to physically look at all of that. But once I do, the grades will be posted and you'll be ready to go. So if you have any questions or problems, just feel free to let me know.